Welcome to Mindful Management, Creating a Trauma-Informed Work Environment, a podcast by Chefalo Consulting, where we share the knowledge, stories, and resources you need to create a trauma-informed culture that supports wellness, growth, and resilience. I'm your host, Shenandoah Chefalo. Welcome, friends. We're so excited to have you joining us again for another episode of Mindful Management. I have been looking forward to this podcast for several weeks. I cannot wait for you to meet my very good friend, Stephanie, today. But before we do that, let me tell you about this amazing human you're going to learn so much from. So welcome, friends. As we say, on today's episode, we're delighted to welcome Stephanie Castellanos, a trailblazer in diversifying the C-suite and fostering anti-oppressive cultures within organizations. As the founder of Uproot Talent and the creator of Woke Shop, Stephanie leverages over 2 decades of grassroots organizing and her rich background as the daughter of Mexican immigrants to champion equitable practices in the workplace. Her work has notably involved leading talent strategies for startups, public schools, founding coalitions to recruit and retain teachers of color, and creating transformative learning experiences for thousands. With Uproot Talent, which is how I came to know Stephanie, she continues to connect leaders from the global majority to impactful roles across various sectors, closing the opportunity gap and co-creating workplaces. Join us as we delve into her insights on making the professional world more inclusive and just. Welcome, Stephanie. We're so glad to have you.
Thank you. That was a phenomenal bio that you just put together. And I'm going to go definitely snatch that. Thank you for that introduction.
Well, the thing that I've come to enjoy, and I keep saying this on the podcast, but I don't think the listeners really understand how much it's true for me, is how much I love people's personal stories. Like, the work you do is important, and I dig that. But people's journeys to doing the work for me has really been the surprise of the podcast for me. Like, how did one, right? And you and I, when we originally talked, I was like, how does one even, I mean, when you're a little kid and even when you're looking at colleges or going through career handbooks in high school, like, hey, being an inclusive hiring recruiter isn't really on the list of things.
It's not, it wasn't even in my peripheral. It wasn't even a thing. If you ask people that know me, they're like, oh, that makes sense. That makes sense. And I'm glad that I found my calling. And also it took quite a bit a little bit of a roller coaster to get here.
Yeah. So you grew up in Inglewood, California, right? So we're both Cali girls at heart. You're still there. I was able to escape California. You're the daughter of immigrants. And you're leading transformative change in the workplace and in hiring practices. We know those shaped your views. I mean, those are big things. But is there something you can point to where you're like, this is what I have to do? Like, you knew that something happened and you were like, that's the work. That's my purpose.
I don't think there was a specific moment, but I do think there was an aggregate of a lot of really powerful small moments. And I think a couple that stick out, or one of them that really sticks out for me, was when I graduated from UCLA. I was the first person in my family to graduate from high school and college. Yay. So I did all that. So I did that. And I was very proud of myself. And it was at the turn of the 2008 crash. And there were limited jobs.
Which, by the way, is not just a crash. Because I think those of us who survived it, we keep calling it a crash, but they're saying is worse than the Great Depression.
We're still feeling it, I think, the moments of that. And graduating during that time and just hearing a lot of friends from around that time that were just struggling to find their path. They were, we invested and graduated from the top public university in the country, and yet we were getting ghosted when applying to jobs. We weren't hearing back from them. We were interviewing, and there just seems to be like 400 applications for one position. So I think just for me, it was an aha moment when I was interviewing, and a lot of people in my network, a lot of my community and people who I leaned in on, who got me to that point, were also sharing these frustrations and challenges. And they were coming to me to refine their resume. They were coming to me to practice before an interview. And I had my aha moment, and that taste of, I got the job, when someone that you supported and poured into and rooted for said, I got the job, and you're on the other side rooting for them and know how much intention there was behind that offer. And I think for me, it became part of is this what I'm good at? Like, is this something that I'm good? And I realized in that reflection that I had been doing this for more than 10 years already, right? That I was the kid when I was in middle school helping my mom navigate many systems, the health system, the educational system, helping her apply to jobs, helping her prepare for interviews as a school bus driver. So I was already on the other side of preparing folks and coaching other people. I was also the person in college that was helping my peers prepare for interviews, for interviews for internships. So in reflecting, and when I had that aha moment, it was a realization that this was my genius in many ways. And while I hadn't intentionally cultivated and poured into it, that I had been practicing it for some time. So I think that to me was a pivotal moment in realizing, and I ended up getting a job right out of college where I was at an after school program at the largest school district, LAUSD. I managed 80 people right out of college. I was developing them. I was hiring them. I was ensuring that they had the tools to be supported and promoted. And that to me was just an powerful experience, being that young and also being having a lot of agency and seeing the power that somebody has when they're seeing the gatekeeping that occurs, right? That was one of the
So
things.
this is a piece, right? Because I was just going to ask you, is like, because then these personal experiences, I mean, as you say, like, you're helping your mom because this is a whole new system, right? So like, not just helping her because she's your mom, it's like, it's a necessity for the family as well. And so I'm just wondering, those coupled with exactly where you're kind of going with this, how that shaped your views on this idea of anti-oppressive practices, right? And for our listeners, maybe you can even describe like what you consider anti-oppressive practices, and we can get into a little bit like, what does that even mean for some of
What
our
does that even
listeners,
mean?
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think for me and the work that I do, what's most important is seeing people beyond the titles, beyond their everyday work. It's humanizing hiring, it's humanizing an interview experience, but also it's being hyper aware of the ways that the isms come into play. So from like racism, right? Ageism, really thinking of all of, I mean, really just the full spectrum of isms that show up. And oftentimes we have unconscious or conscious bias. And doing that work for me meant that I was working on both sides. I was working as an advocate for the candidate and understanding their perspective and going through an experience, and how deflating an interview, a job search experience is, and how much it can feel in the ways that I felt in 2009 and 2010, how I felt, which is like, do I matter? Are my skills important? How do I cultivate and share and amplify those skills? And on the other side, representing organizations and listening to the chatter, the unwritten and unspoken rules of hiring, and seeing that there was a gap between knowledge, right? That candidates, people like my mom, people like my neighbors who I grew up with in Inglewood, did not understand a lot of these nuances. And so the other part of doing anti-oppressive work is not doing the gatekeeping, right? It is understanding that true, inclusive, and anti-oppressive hiring is transparent, it's direct, it sees people beyond just the work that they do and show up and do every day. And then for clients, it's being extra intentional and sweating the details. The details is what makes a process more inclusive and ensuring that, you know, you are disrupting the ways that anti-Blackness shows up, the ways that oppression shows up, the way that we are swayed one way or another because of our own biases. And everybody, let me just also say that everybody has bias. That's not the problem. That's not the issue here. It's how you use that bias and how you're making decisions based on that bias. So it's all, to me, anti-oppression hiring thinks about all those things, and they're all interconnected. You can't have one without the other.
Okay, so now I got like 47 other questions, right? This is where Shen begins to go off script because you said a word in there that I think is really important. And to just give context to listeners, like I met you because I saw your post on LinkedIn and I was like, this person's interesting. What's happening over here, right? Like you begin to hear this theme, but you talked about transparency. And one thing that I've sort of noticed on LinkedIn lately with kind of leadership gurus on LinkedIn, right? And I'm sure that you've seen this is there seems to be this trend of what people are talking about doing versus maybe what's actually happening in the hiring process. So I see a lot of leadership people, and maybe you'll help either confirm or deny what I'm seeing as reality, who talk about resumes don't matter, who talk about give flexibility to your people, don't micromanage them, who talk about kind of these really great things that in theory sound really amazing. And I think, gosh, I would want to work for this person. But whenever I see one of these, I actually go to their company page and see what jobs they have posted on Facebook or on LinkedIn, right? And I note that then the requirements for applying to this position don't equate to the very things that they're talking about. So help us, like when you say transparency, Stephanie, like how are you helping organizations to even assess what kind of shifts they make? Because I'm going to make an assumption that every company has shifts it needs to make.
100%, yes. I mean, I'll give you an example. We're currently getting ready to launch a search, and part of our process is understanding the position that I have as a consultant, as an external to the organization. So I think that's important to name. I'm not doing the work every day, and I think oftentimes
That's the best part of consultancy, Stephanie, is we don't have to do the work every day. We just get to say, here's the right way, but it's up to you to go do it that way.
Right. And also like really keeping paternalism and the impact of paternalism at the center of that, and not making any assumptions or thinking that we know best for others. And so I think for me coming in, or any recruiter, as you're getting ready to launch a role and trying to figure out what does this person need to achieve in order to be successful, and that to us it's the blueprint of the search, is getting clarity and making sure that we are clear and communicate what this person will do. It's not a laundry list of duties. Instead is being very transparent of the expectations. Here are the goals. Here are how you're going to be measured as a person coming in that first year, and being clear with candidates. And not only that, but making sure that they have access to people like me to hop on a call and be able to ask questions and talk about a lot of the nuances that often are left out of jobs. So like, or job descriptions. So, you know, asking me about the cultural climate, getting a conversation going around what are the unspoken rules of the workplace. Those are the things that I think to me are the difference makers and are super important to hiring underrepresented talent, right? These are the types of questions that I often get from underrepresented talent, and they have to dig through in order to find it, or they get to the final round and they realize that then, and then they wasted the organization's time and their time at that point.
Yeah. So I'm just wondering how much, especially like when we're thinking about something like job descriptions, because and I'm sort of thinking of one that I just, in the same example that I gave you, right? Here's this leader talking all these amazing things. You go, look, you see the job description. How much of that do you suppose is leftover of this is the way we've always written a job description? And that ability, because we know change is hard, right? Like the brain doesn't like, I talk about this almost every episode on the show because change is at the forefront of all of this stuff. It's unsafe to change, even when we know that change is better for us, even when we know when we have diverse talent pools, we innovate, businesses are more profitable. Like all those stats exist. So I think logically companies know that, right? And yet change is still hard. So when it comes to something just even as simple as a job description, is that where you really start with your companies about, do we even need half this stuff? Because I read some of these things and I'm like, it's 2024. Everyone knows how to use Word. Like,
Yeah, yeah. I
right.
mean, it somewhat starts there. I'd say a lot of it also is allowing the organization to hold the mirror up and assess and understand the strengths, what's not great, reckon with harm that has been caused. I think a lot of that is pre-job description because, at least in our process, because we want to make sure that as people who are being hired to bring talent and equity expertise to the space, we want to help shepherd and coach leadership to understand what they need as well. And we serve as a mirror to reflect that based on what's happening in the historical context. All of those things are important. So you can't have one without the other. Then, so that alone is a mindset shift, right? People are so ready to just, we need somebody yesterday. So we're just going to write this job description and we're going to go into the market and we're going to find the person without taking a moment to reflect on what do we really need? What are they going to come across if they get hired? What are the challenges, the obstacles that they're going to have to work around or break in order to be successful in the roles, and how do we provide the resources and support so that they are able to, right? So really being able to have that candid conversation comes first. And oftentimes, there are things that we put in our opportunity descriptions, or even when I hop on a call with a candidate, that the client says, please don't share that. And my question is always to them, how the candidate will find out, the candidate will know eventually when they're hired that things are happening within the organization. So either you face it now and you hire the person that's ready to tackle whatever is happening, or you face it in 6 months when they give you a resignation letter and they exit and you have to hire again, right? So
Yeah.
I think
So I
it's,
want to ask you about
yeah,
that more deeply
okay.
because this also ties into a little bit. I want to get your opinion in a minute about, do we focus more on hard skills or these soft skills that I
Mhm,
always,
mhm.
they never feel soft to me, but if we
Yeah, no,
focus on
we call
those.
them power skills.
But I work in a lot of systems, as you know, that typically I get hired because something really bad has happened, right? So like I'm the person who's coming, like something bad's happened. We know we need to make a change. Now maybe we should talk about trauma informed frameworks, right? So that's kind of what happens because no one's going to think, I mean, we're just not proactive in that way of like, hey, everything's great. Let's work on this issue that doesn't seem to be an issue, right? So to your point, because I was just on a call a few weeks ago and somebody said, Shen, you were speaking to some of our staff and I heard you, but I want you to know that the problem you're talking about happened a long time ago. We don't need to talk about it anymore. We've hired a lot of new people and they don't know about the problem. And I was just like, wait, they know about the
They will find out 100%.
So, how do you help leaders? Because I think there's a lot of shame and guilt that's tied to this, right? Oftentimes, the leader who's also there isn't clearly the leader who caused the problem very often because those leaders have been fired or moved on or done the thing. And they know it was a problem and they're trying to fix it. But part of it is like, they just don't even wanna talk about, like, can we just move on from the problem? And so I'm just wondering, maybe do you have advice for our leaders who are listening who feel like avoidance might be better than head on?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen both. I've seen the impact of avoidance and I've seen the impact of facing the harm head on. I think some organizations can do more harm if they're not ready also to face it head on, right? So I think part of it is really also assessing, are we ready to handle this? Are we the people that need to be holding space? Do we need to hire an external partner? Because I do think that there is a mixed bag of there's new people here. They don't know. We don't want to introduce them to an environment that no longer exists, or which I would definitely like to differ that's a unique claim. So I mean, I think in terms of advice is it doesn't have to be fully head on, right? You can do it also in bite sizes. I think first and foremost, it's acknowledging that harm has been done and or there is a more inclusive and equitable way to approach a system or process or whatever that be. The second is then say, what can we take on now? And what can, or how do we scaffold the change? And I think that allows people to not feel the fear of cognitive overload, of feeling overwhelmed. This is too big of an issue, or this is too much to handle. And so I think, you know, in terms of hiring, it's helpful to also help organizations because one of the goals that we have is we want to work with organizations that eventually fire us. And what I mean by
Mhm.
that is
Yeah, no, I know.
we, as an external expert and consultant in this space, want to build the capacity of the organization to do this work internally and sustainably. And so
This
we
is where
have
I'll ask my producer to put in the round of applause, Stephanie, because I think that to me is one of the reasons I love you and your work so much because we are 100% compatible on that. And frankly, in the consulting space, you don't find it very often. But it's like, no, no, you're supposed to fire me and get rid of me. You got to do this work internally. I don't work here every day. So I can't make the little tweaks that need to stick, right? To make you amazing.
right. And I think for us, what's important is that our process aims to be an integration process where you learn our process and it's not a cookie cutter process, but also it might not work for your organization. There might be parts of it that your organization is ready for and some others that you're not ready for in terms of our process. So we have a partner who we've worked since the beginning of our launch and about 2 years ago. And they're now at the place where they've done just that. They have adopted our process. They've changed their internal hiring systems. They have a new way of recruiting. They have new practices and strategies that they're testing and piloting. They done small changes that make all of the difference in terms of having a search committee with and really trying to democratize the decisions that are being made. That already is huge, right? So little things like that I think help organizations see that it's not as difficult, I think, as sometimes we make it out to be, especially as folks, you know, I've been the talent HR person at an organization or the head of it. And I think we often have to persuade leadership to make some of these changes because there is a fear of what happens if we make this change and it doesn't work. And so I think you have to really also create a culture where you can take risks and you can fail forward and encourage others to fail forward.
How do we make it safe to fail, right? Like, because we want you to innovate, but innovation, you're just not going to get it right the first time. So, for as much as we say innovate, 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 if you really want your folks to innovate, you've got to allow space that it's not going to always work out the first time, right? That there's this piece. So, I'm curious because I think there's in HR, in recruiting right now, there's a lot, especially in the diversity, equity, inclusion space. There's a lot of talking about how technology and digital platforms are either enhancing or maybe not so much enhancing anti-oppressive hiring practices. We know there's a good reliance of AI that's happening, but AI has built-in bias. As you said, we can't everyone has bias and AI was programmed with bias. So thus, right, its bias is innate. So do you have recommendations? Is there are there pros and cons to the technology, to digital platforms that you say, or maybe a couple of best practices, or hey, here's one thing you should really think about avoiding when it comes to technology in this realm?
Yeah, I mean, I always see things in two sides. One from a candidate's perspective and using these tools and like AI or ChatGPT, for example, and then on the client side as we're designing opportunities and trying to find folks out in the market. I think for the most part, AI is incredibly helpful in this space to generate ideas. I think it's a great for getting us out of like a writer's block or getting ideas on how you might frame something. And at the same time, it's not the end all be all. There should absolutely be a human element that you can incorporate emotional intelligence that I think AI is, and that you can also include expertise from the market and your own expertise from the market. And so I think for us at Uproot, we do use AI quite a bit. I had a session, a learning experience session on how to use ChatGPT for recruitment, and we use it often. We do a lot of research, and so it helps us with our research and compiling. Like, if I'm going to be doing a search for an NGO, I might want to see what other organizations do similar work with similar missions and similar budgets. And so we'll use that tool of technology in order to pull a report, and then I'll use that then to source and find talent that work at those specific organizations that are mission aligned or similar in size. So strategically, it helps as well. On the candidate side, and I get this question a lot because I see resumes that are absolutely like AI generated, and I can tell when they are. I think it, like I said, I think it's helpful, and I think that's even in the job search. I see some folks use it for like job search purposes. So I think again, using it as an idea generator, but not letting it be the end all be all is what I would say about that.
I'll be curious to see where it goes in the right because listen, I grew up in the era of hey, upload your resume and then you would do that. Like when we were when technology was a baby, right? And then they would say, now fill in all the boxes that were all on your resume, right? So you upload your resume and then they're like repeat everything that was on your resume in all of these boxes, which I think for, when before I became a freelancer, so when I wrote my book, I thought there's no way I could be a consultant, right? Like I needed a job doing the work that I wanted to do. And I remember I applied to 1,000 jobs on LinkedIn. And I got, Stephanie, guess how many interviews I got?
I'm afraid to guess this number, but I'm going to say five.
I got 0 interviews out of 1,000. So when people say, Shen, why did you become an entrepreneur? I say, because I didn't have a choice. I had bills that needed to get paid and nobody would hire me. And so that's why I think what you do is so just honestly so important. Why I think this conversation's important because listen, I'm working with leaders down the thing. Now they've hired people and they're like, we're a mess. We're a toxic culture, right? And so I'm with this. An organization is just getting rid of a toxic leader that has caused a lot of issues that we've been trying to sort through, but nobody wanted to give them the pink slip, right? So, and now they've done that. And I think in their mind, they somehow think the new person will just fix it all. And so part of me is constantly like, can you rethink your like I'm always, how would you see onboarding through the trauma informed lens? How does that look? So I'm just wondering, as you're kind of looking forward in for your own business and just what you see happening in the world, what's the emerging trend? What are you excited about that you see shaping the future of hiring and onboarding to maybe give hope to the rest of us?
I'm gonna give hope after also caveat with a caveat, which is I'm in the I'm in the quote unquote DEI space, right? Right now, that space is under attack, right? There has been a lot of jobs that were in the wake of George Floyd's murder and the uprisings that were created in what 4 years ago that no longer exist. Um, and everybody was checking a box and saying that they were committed to creating more equitable workplaces. And we are looking back at it now and seeing that a lot of it was just all talk, I would say. So I think that knowing that and seeing, I mean, I've had tons of talent come to me with head of DEI roles that are like, where do I apply? There's no opportunities that are right up my alley anymore. And so hearing that to me is somewhat making me reassess what our role is also in this space of hiring, and what does the future look like as we try to move organizations, specifically social impact organizations, towards more anti-oppressive hiring practices. So I think balancing what is the cultural climate around even just having the conversation. Some organizations don't even want to have the conversation.
In some places, you can't even use the words, right? Like you can't even use diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workspace. And that's an important piece. And from my lens, I've seen a lot of, we're not calling it that now, we're calling it the wellness coordinator position or the well-being at work position. Like it seems like we're fighting over language, if I'm
Right.
honest.
Yes.
And I know these positions both exist. It's not mutually exclusive. It doesn't apply to everybody. I know plenty of organizations who have people in both of those kinds of positions. But that's what I'm wondering, like, are you seeing as well this recoil, right? So we were like, hey, let's hire everybody in these positions. And part of my question is did we create a position? Did the positions have power to even make the kinds of changes they talked about, right? Like, because my understanding is people in those positions are lasting less than 18 months because of pure frustration that like, hey, here's my recommendations, but then nobody wants to do anything with the recommendations, right?
which leads to it feeling like a checkbox, right? That they were hired without the intention of giving them true power to help create the change that they were quote unquote hired for. So I do think there is a little bit of apathy that I'm feeling in this moment in time around it, and maybe because I'm in the thick of it all in terms of the work that we do, and at the same time, because we specifically work with social impact organizations, nonprofits, school districts, foundations, there is a little hope that I'm hanging on to, because there are still a lot of people that are pushing for this in many ways. In some cases, it's not safe to push in visible ways, and they're doing, pulling the strings from their little corner, and all of that is making a wave or a difference in the organization. So I think that there's absolutely so room to do this work in this way, and there is a lot of reframing that needs to be done. And I think reframing is okay if we're able to move people and move the needle. So I do a lot of reframing in our work. I might, like you said, I might not use white supremacy. I might not say, right, but I'm maybe naming some of the tenets of what might be visible. So I think part of it is reframing. Part of it is also standing our ground in this space and being rooted in the work that we do. And for us, one of the reasons why I wanted to do this work and do this and be an entrepreneur is because I wanted to choose who I worked with. Uh, and I feel that's a huge privilege to be able to be in the position to do so. And it is what's fueling my desire to continue to be in this space, because I'm able to create partnerships that are values and mission aligned. I'm able to work with an organization and at the end of it say, hey, I don't think we're a match, and that's okay. Here are a couple of other folks that I think might be more aligned that you might want to work with. So we have no quarry or of doing that. We want to work with people who are ready, to do this work, and it's okay if you're not there.
Yeah, sometimes there's work to do before the work, right? And I say that there's plenty of space for that. So I want to hit on something because one of the areas that you work is obviously a big area for me, and that's education. And specifically, as we're having this conversation, we know that that's a realm that's really been under attack with the use of diversity, equity, and inclusion. I say I've lost a lot of friends in the fallout of different school boards, right, across the United States, where people have really done the right thing, but have been asked to leave positions or been told they're no longer welcome for doing those things. How do we help people understand that anti-oppressive is really for everybody? Because it feels like that's the to me, and I know we're talking about you and I are talking about the 50,000-foot view here, not the granular the pieces of it, and it is granular, which are super important. But just in the 50,000-foot view, how can we help educators who I know are listening to this podcast? Because there's a lot of research around kids who have teachers that look like them, administrators that look like them. We know, for example, that teachers who live in the district in which they teach suspend kids at lesser rates, right? Discipline kids differently than if they're teaching in communities that they don't reside in themselves. So I'm just wondering, Stephanie, if maybe you can even talk to some of those pieces about why this is so critical for our nation, I think, in the education space.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in a predominantly Black and Brown community. I'm also a white person in this world as a Latina who is white. And I think for me, in looking back, I had Black and Brown. And I thought about this as I was doing teacher recruitment as an example. But my first teacher that I thought, whoa, that kind of looks like my family and my mom and us. I mean, that was as early as kindergarten, right? So, um, growing up in a predominantly Black and Brown community and having Black and Brown teachers made all the difference. And I couldn't really put my finger on it when I was younger of why that made that difference. And now being on the other side, I think it's really thinking beyond just the diversity piece, right? Because diversity is one component that I think is important, and being able to see yourself, or for people who live in the community to see themselves, not just race, not just ethnicity, gender, but really thinking around the spectrum of what it means to have people who mirror and reflect who you're serving, right? So I think it's also getting folks to think beyond what we normally think about when we think of diversity, which is like race, gender, or phenotype, gender expression, right?
No,
Those
I
things
totally agree with you because for
are.
me, the thing that I think about is in my elementary school, I had a really important male teacher. And I mean, we just know like on the spectrum, there's not a lot of male teachers in elementary education. Like they're hard to find. So when you just even think about diversity in that realm, but that was really impactful for me as a person who grew up with a single mom. I didn't have a lot of male role I had 0 positive male role models in my life. Like, that was really my first positive male role model, and so when you talk about, like, it's all the ways, right? It's not just these very specific things about and he wasn't my race, it wasn't any of that. For me, it was this very specific, like, "Oh, m men can be decent people."
Yeah, yeah.
And I was in 3rd, 4th grade at the time, and it was it's always the teacher I think of when someone says, "Think about elementary school," and I'm like, "No, exactly." Like,
You know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah. Like I immediately think of Miss Robinson, who was my middle school teacher and was there through my transition from my family dynamic really transitioning and my mom becoming a single parent. And her ability to be able to nurture and support me through that, I think was the emotional support that I didn't think I'd get in a school setting that I did get. So I think, beyond that and be like really thinking of diversity and the full spectrum of what that means. But also, I mean, even when you think about hiring, one of the things that I always want to hold at the center is we want people to feel valued in the space, right? It's not, no matter what your background is or experience is, this is an opportunity to make people feel and truly make it a two-way street, right? So make it feel like you're not just interviewing the school district, or the organization is not just interviewing you, but vice versa, you're interviewing them. And these are the practices that don't necessarily, but the other aspects of hiring that should be centered as well. And so, I mean, I think, like I said, I think it's really about getting people to think about this in bite sizes, is what has helped us in really creating some systems change. I think it's also about inspiring people and allowing people to see themselves as recruiters as well, right? So we always say, like, everybody's a recruiter. Everybody is, you're talking about your organization to others. You know somebody who knows somebody who might be a great fit. So really treating everybody as experts, I think, is really important. Yes, I am the recruiter for the role, but we're thought partners in this. I think empowering people to also feel like they have a say and agency in how people are welcomed and onboarded and selected to come into the organization. So I think that's been really helpful for us.
I love that. So this can feel overwhelming if you're a leader, if you're a internal recruiter, if that's your title, if you work in HR, like all of this can feel like we're getting nothing right. We're doing a terrible job everywhere. So for people listening, Stephanie, what's maybe the single most, and maybe you don't just have one, maybe you have two or three piece of advice that you could give them, like right now, like something they could do right this second that might help them move the needle to start building that momentum to create a more inclusive
Yeah.
environment?
One of the most important things is not waiting for talent to come to you, right? So I think often what a common practice is that you post it on a job board and you're like, whoo, done. I'm just going to wait for the right person to click on that job and apply. That is a false idea if you would like to engage with people who have been historically oppressed, marginalized, and exploited, right? And the reason behind that, or what I will say, what you should or could do instead, is you can be much more intentional about finding and engaging in spaces where you might meet represented talent. So for us, that means we're not just job posting jobs on like Indeed, which, or LinkedIn, or whatever platform people post on, but we are actively providing resources to groups and people, in exchange for nothing, right? And so what that means is we're doing career development and inviting people to join. We are supporting multicultural professional organizations or the Divine Nine, alumni groups. We're engaged and providing resources. And in exchange, if you see a job that aligns for you, perfect. And now you have access to me. You know who I am. You can schedule a call with me, and you know me a little bit more. So I think it's important for recruitment to not be extractive, right? And oftentimes recruitment is very like, I have this job, have this carrot, and we wave it around and we wait for people to come to us. And it really should be a mutually beneficial relationship that is supporting candidates, whether you apply or not. It's, I got you, right? Like they know that. So that's what people pay us for. I think for Uproot, that's the sauce. The sauce is that I can call this top candidate and they will pick up the phone when I call them, because I've been there for them and I have invested and poured into that relationship, and they trust me when I come to with a position and say, hey, I think you might be a great fit for this. They trust that I have their best interest and I'm not just trying to fill a seat.
I absolutely love that. I want to ask you our very fun quick fire questions before we end. But before I even get to quick fire, I want to ask you one more, because that's kind of from the perspective of the employer, right? But so for maybe we have a listener out there who feels like, I'm in this job that's not inclusive, that's super oppressive. I've been harmed here, but I also feel like I can't leave because I think imposter syndrome is real. I mean, I'll just call it out for myself. Every day I'm like, what am I doing here? And I know you're a small business owner and you feel probably often very like, I never knew I'd be managing this thing. Okay, here we go, right? What piece of advice can you give for somebody who's just not sure if they can leave or doesn't have the privilege to leave maybe right now? What's something they can do, whether it's career development, to your point, I heard you say that a little earlier, to take a baby step to get that confidence to be able to make it? Is there something they can do while they're in the position to lessen the harm they're receiving? Any advice for people who are feeling stuck in that moment?
Yeah, I mean, I've been in that place where I couldn't leave. I didn't have a safety net or security to leave. And my mom used to always tell me there's no better time to find a job than while you have one, right? So I think it's being intentional, just putting feelers out there, talking to people, leaning in on community, reaching out to people, just letting people know that and asking for help, right? I think the asking for help is what is the hardest for me. And I hear is very hard for us, especially women of color. But saying, hey, I'm in the market, I'm low key, I'm not telling people yet. If you know of anything, please feel free to pass it along. So I think one is just putting yourself out there. The second thing I would say, which I think is it's a little bit harder, but I think, oftentimes, and I don't know if this is the right advice to give, but you don't need to make friends or best friends at work. And if that means that you are checking in and checking right out and really identifying what's the season of my life, right? I think that is really important. For me, I've been in a place where, yes, I took a pay cut, but I took a pay cut because I'm currently really invested in trying to learn something, and I'm going to learn it in this role where I'm going to get a certain type of experience in this role that I really would like to get under my belt. And right now, for example, I'm in the season where I'm a new mom, a new parent, and I'm looking for a space, and that's why I'm in doing this work where I have flexibility, where I don't work weekends, where I shut my laptop at 5 p.m. and I don't look at it at night. That wasn't where I've been in the past, but I think it's important to reflect on what's the season of your life. And then you're not going to find the most perfect place. Perfect places don't exist. You're going to have to compromise and give and take a little bit of what you want. But if you're sure of what season of your life you're in, then you can start making calculated moves towards it. So if that means saying, okay, I'm going to be here and giving yourself a deadline till December, and I'm going to be working to apply to jobs until then, I'm going to be putting feelers out there, but giving yourself the soft deadline and giving yourself grace if and when you don't achieve it, I think is also okay. Like saying, I'm going to try my best, and I know that this is a really tough market, and we'll see.
And you don't get the say, right? Like, because of all the things we've been talking about, at the end of the day, you don't get the say. Stephanie, I hope you will come on because this insight, I think it's super helpful it's super helpful to me. 3 pages of notes, everybody. Like I write down all the things. So, you can answer for fun or you can answer from your work perspective. You have a almost newborn. I mean, I still consider newborn. If you're under 1, it's a newborn in my book because that's a lot of work. So, what's the latest book or TV show you're either reading, binging that's standing out to you for pure joy or work related or
Yeah, I'm
both?
gonna say for pure joy at this moment
Yeah.
because I feel like I'm always podcast wise, I'm like always like geopolitics, politics. Like I'm always listening to podcasts that I'm going to work related or going to enhance my learning. But when it comes to TV, I really love a good gossip, doesn't have anything, nothing educational to learn. I got my partner into The Bachelorette.
Okay. I've never watched any of The Bachelor or Bachelorette.
Yeah.
I know the
Well, I just watched
concept.
last season and now I'm into it. And so That I feel like I've been into The Bachelorette. Love is Blind Mexico is my new thing. So I'm
I
just
have binge watched all of Love is Blind UK, which is where it started, right? The series actually started in UK, and I got turned on to it by my 20-year-old daughter. And then I binge watched the entire thing while I was walking on the treadmill. I didn't know
yeah.
there was a Mexico one, but now I will tune
It
in.
just came out and it's not done yet. It's not even done yet. So I'm like hanging on to that. And so, yeah, I think it's important to have, for me, TV that doesn't require me to think too hard because I do it all the time and I'm constantly feeling anger in many cases because of the world and the state of the world that I'm like, okay, I just need something that's not going to talk about
Listen,
all
Love is Blind will make you equally angry.
yeah.
The boys
Yeah.
on those shows say and do some really dumb things sometimes.
Which sometimes it's very expected.
That's right. If
It's
you could have dinner with a historical or contemporary leader, who would you choose and what's the one question you have to ask them?
that is really hard.
It's always the hardest question, but it's such a good one because I learned so much about people.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big Tupac fan, so
I
I'm gonna
love
go
this.
Tupac. Uh,
California
yeah,
dreaming.
I mean, I just want to
We'll
learn about.
probably get sued just for me singing that
Yeah,
bar. But
be careful. Don't go for too far on that jingle. No, for me, I would like to learn a little bit more about his upbringing, and I know that he has strong revolutionary roots with his mom and the work around the Black Panther Party, and I think a lot of the really thinking about Black liberation and how that's intertwined with music. And I don't feel like there's been an artist, maybe Kendrick Lamar, I would say currently, but I don't think there's been a lot of artists like Tupac that was able to do that in a way that he was, and so gracefully and artistically. So yeah, I
what do you
would
want to ask them though? What's the question you want to ask them?
I just want to know about their childhood. Like, tell me a little bit more. I just want to learn about it. Whatever they're
Yeah,
willing
we
to
get these
do.
glimpses with him in his poetry, right? It is an
Yeah,
interesting piece. We get little glimpses, and I've seen some interviews with his mom as well. But you're right. I'd love to hear what he has to say. What's the hobby that you have? Maybe you've let it go a little bit because I know you have a little one at home, but what just fills you with joy and you kind of forget what time it is while you're doing it?
hiking. Yeah, I love, and I'm in a great place, LA. They have tons of trails surrounding the city. And I will take any moment that I can to say, "Hey, mom, can you watch Orion for a few hours while we,
You
go
got a
hiking?"
favorite? You have a favorite trail you've done, a favorite place you've been?
I
What's your
do. I don't know if I
We
want
have a
to
lot of Stephanie,
gate.
we'll I know. Well, we'll drop a little. My next book is actually called Hiking for Stillness, Stephanie. So we'll see.
I love that. Yeah. I have a hiking club called Hiking y Perreo. So perreo is reggaeton music, so Spanish like hip hop. And we plug in, listen to Spanish hip hop, and we hike. And my favorite hike is one that I used to go as a kid, which is in Topanga Canyon, where the Santa Monica Mountains are. And it has a cave, and I go into the cave. Anytime I bring people, they're like, "It's a real cave. You were not kidding." I'm like, it is a real cave." Go into the cave and we have like lunch in there. I'll bring my snacks and a charcuterie spread. So I like to make it more than just, it's not really just like the workout, although great, I get a workout.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's about like the view and the time that you spend with whomever is
Brain.
with you. So yeah, that's what I've been. If I
So
can find,
Stephanie, as soon as you said that, I was like, oh my gosh, I'm seeing a new collab coming from Chefalo Consulting and Uproot Talent. We're gonna have to do an event that involves
yes,
a lot of hiking and
yeah,
wellness and tackling some of these topics. I've been dreaming of, could we do a hiking training? So like we're hiking, but we're also doing the training. So instead of being in the classroom environment, which is where every training
that's
takes
interesting.
place,
I love that. Tell me
what
how
if
that.
we were out like, and it's like a hike, but then we might also do like some rope climbing, or we might like, I don't know anything about rope climbing, by the way. So I'm just throwing that out there. But like, right, like, could we do these things that might make us a little uncomfortable?
I like
and
that.
talk
Tell
about
me how
these trainings.
that goes.
I'm going to rope you into it. You're going to have to be one of the leaders of one of our sessions or something.
Yeah.
So, Stephanie, it's so great to have you on. How can you tell our listeners how they can find you?
Yeah.
What's your website? What's your preferred platform? What do you have coming up? Where can they connect with you?
Yeah, so folks can connect with me on social media platforms, Uproot Talent, UPROOT TALENT on all platforms. So from Twitter/X, Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook. You can also join our job board. So we have a job board, a national job board for underrepresented talent and social impact. And you can join at careers.uproottalent.co. Or you can join our newsletter by simply going to our website at uproottalent.co and get updates on happenings, events, workshops. We have a free career development workshop for our talent network members every third Wednesday of the month. And so you can also join learning experiences for free.
I love it. We love free here. Free is the magic word. Stephanie, thank you so much. Congratulations on your baby. Please give them a hug from all of us. And we hope you'll come on again and tell us and give us updates about what you're up to, what new things you're seeing. It's such a pleasure to meet you and have you on the podcast, by the way. I've been so looking forward to this.
Yeah, and thank you for creating this space and platform for people to talk about these types of issues. And I know this won't be the last time we hang out, so I will see you soon.
I'm going to see you next time I'm in LA for sure, because I'm getting a trip to Topanga Canyon. I don't know about everybody else, but the charcuterie, I'm up for it. I don't know a lot about Spanish hip hop, but I'm willing to learn. For our listeners, thank you so much for joining us. Remember, pole pole, slowly, slowly we go. Little things matter, and we can do hard things. Can't wait till our next episode. Please take care of yourselves, and we'll see you next time. Thanks, everyone. Mindful Management, Creating a Trauma-Informed Work Environment is brought to you by Chefalo Consulting. To learn more about Chefalo Consulting and our trauma-informed change management and professional development solutions, please visit chefaloconsulting.com. That's Chefalo, CHEFALO, consulting.com. Make sure you don't miss these transformative conversations by subscribing to Mindful Management wherever you get your podcast. Thanks for listening. And remember, change happens one step at a time.